Why was everyone laughing when she picked up the rifle? The question lingered in the dry Texas air, heavy as the sun that baked the training ground. 30 recruits stood in formation, boots grinding the dirt, sweat already soaking through uniforms. But only one of them carried the weight of silence, Sarah Martinez, 22 years old, 5'2", just over 100 pounds. The men around her noticed. They always noticed. Some smirked, others whispered. A few let their laughter spill out without shame. To them, she looked like a girl who had wandered into the wrong story, too small, too delicate, too quiet to belong in this place where toughness was currency and fragility was punished. She had grown used to the looks. Weeks of training had taught her to keep her face still, her emotions hidden. But inside, she felt the heat of their judgment, the gnawing bite of doubt. It wasn't the drill sergeant's barked commands that unsettled her. It was the weight of eyes, waiting for her to fail. Sergeant Murphy's voice cut through the chatter. A veteran with 15 years of hard training behind him, he was the kind of man who could level a room with just a stare. "Today," he said, letting the word hang like a warning, "we separate the soldiers from the pretenders. Marksmanship begins now." The rifles lay on the table, black steel gleaming beneath the sun. For most recruits, this was the moment they had been waiting for, to show off, to prove themselves. For Sarah, it was the moment everyone expected her to break. Marcus Thompson went first, tall, broad-shouldered, his voice carried as easily as his ego. "Been shooting since I was 8, first deer at 12. He made sure they all heard it. When his 5 shots cracked out, 3 hit the outer rings, 1 missed, and 1 grazed the edge. He muttered something about warming up, but the swagger in his voice had thinned. Others followed. Jake Morrison, the college athlete, more muscle than patience, grinned as he fired, scattering his shots across the paper target. Danny Rodriguez, Chicago-born and brash, squeezed off his rounds with speed but little precision. One by one, they took their turns. Nothing spectacular, nothing worth remembering. And then it was her turn. The whispers began, even before she touched the rifle. "Bet she can't even hit the target. Somebody get her a water gun. Hope she doesn't break her arm with the recoil." Laughter again. Sarah felt her cheeks warm, but her face stayed calm, her movements measured. She had learned long ago that answering mockery with anger only gave it power. Quiet resistance was stronger. So she reached out, lifted the rifle, and felt its weight settle into her hands. Heavier than her grandfather's old .22, but not unfamiliar. The steel was cold, steady, alive. She remembered his voice. Her grandfather, the Korean War veteran who had taken her onto the porch of his ranch when she was just a child. Shooting isn't about fighting the rifle. It's about listening to it, about knowing its rhythm, about letting the world go quiet until it's just you, the sights, and the truth waiting at the other end. Sarah stepped to the firing line. Sergeant Murphy had shown them the stance, the grip, the breathing. But when she tried it, something felt wrong, stiff, unnatural. So she shifted her weight, tilted her shoulder, found what felt right for her body, not someone else. The rifle seemed to fit her then, like it had been waiting. She drew in a breath, held it. The chatter behind her blurred into nothing. The world shrank to her heartbeat, the sights, the stillness before the shot. The rifle barked. She absorbed the recoil without flinching, already realigning. Shot after shot, smooth, controlled, deliberate. And then silence. The laughter had stopped. Even before Sergeant Murphy checked the target, the recruits sensed it. Something had shifted. The man raised his spotting scope, his weathered face unreadable. He lingered longer than he had with anyone else. And when he lowered the scope, his brow was raised, just slightly. 4 shots in the center ring, the 5th brushing close, tighter grouping than any man had managed that day. The air went heavy with disbelief. The same voices that had mocked her just minutes earlier now stumbled into silence, their jokes drying up in their throats. Sarah set the rifle down and walked back to her place in the formation. Her face gave nothing away, but inside there was something burning. a small, defiant spark. Confidence. It was fragile, new, almost dangerous, but it was hers. By evening, the story had already spread. Military camps thrive on stories, and this one grew with each retelling. Some swore she had shot 5 perfect bullseyes. Others claimed she had done it with her eyes closed. Exaggeration wrapped around truth like vines around stone, but the foundation remained. She had outshot them all. In the mess hall, Marcus stabbed his potatoes like they had insulted him. His hunting tailies, once delivered with loud pride, now carried little weight. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Jake tried a different angle. "Paper targets aren't combat. Let's see if she freezes when bullets fly back." His words drew nods, but they were weaker now, tinged with something unfamiliar. Doubt. Sergeant Murphy said nothing to the group. But later, when the sun bled red across the training field, he called her aside. "Martinez," he said, voice lower than usual, softer but still sharp. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" She hesitated. Talking about her grandfather always carried a weight. He was long gone, but his presence lingered in her memories, stitched into the lessons he had given her. "My grandfather taught me, Sergeant. He hunted after Korea, said it gave him peace." Murphy studied her face, nodding once. "Good foundation, but what you did today was more than teaching. That's natural ability. Question is, what do you want to do with it?" The words planted themselves deep. She hadn't thought much beyond surviving training, beyond keeping her head down and proving she could last. But suddenly, the horizon looked different. The next morning, the range was harder. Wind tugged at their shots, shadows distorted their aim. The men who had mocked her were struggling. Bullets drifted, targets mocked them back with scattered holes. Sarah stepped forward again, feeling their eyes, but this time the whispers were different. Not laughter, not mockery, curiosity, skepticism, yes, but also anticipation. She read the wind like her grandfather had taught her. Watched the grass bend, the flags flutter, the subtle movements in the world that others missed. Adjusted her aim, breathed, fired. Her shots landed clean. Center, center, center again. By the time she finished, the silence was louder than the gunfire. Murphy walked to the target himself, shook his head in quiet disbelief. "Martinez," he said, loud enough for the others to hear. "In 15 years of training recruits, I've never seen anything like this." The words fell heavy. The recruits shifted uneasily, forced to accept what their eyes could no longer deny. That night in the barracks, the air was different. No laughter, no jokes, just quiet conversations, sideways glances, unspoken acknowledgments. Some were already finding excuses. "She's just good at shooting, that's all." But others were beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong about her. Sarah didn't celebrate. She cleaned her rifle with steady hands, the way her grandfather had taught her. She felt the spark inside her grow stronger, steadier. For the first time, she wondered if she didn't just belong here, but if she had something rare, something worth chasing. Later that week, Colonel Patricia Harrison summoned her. A decorated veteran, a woman who had carved her path through decades of doubt and resistance. Harrison studied her with the same curiosity others had, but without the arrogance. "Martinez," she said, voice sharp but not unkind. "I've been reviewing your scores. Impressive for someone with no formal training." Sarah sat straight, nerves coiling tight. "Thank you, ma'am. My grandfather taught me when I was younger." Harrison leaned back, eyes weighing her with the precision of a scale. "Murphy tells me you're a natural. That means something. Have you considered specialized training?" The question landed heavy, almost frightening. Specialized training wasn't just another step. It was a door to something bigger, harder, more dangerous. It meant expectations, scrutiny, isolation, but also possibility. Sarah didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. The path had already begun to unfold in front of her. And as she left Harrison's office, the question that had once haunted her, why was everyone laughing when she picked up the rifle, began to change. because they had no idea what she was capable of. And soon they would. What happens when respect replaces laughter, but suspicion remains? Sarah felt it the moment she walked back into the barracks after her second day on the range. The tone had shifted. The laughter that once filled the bunks had been replaced by silence, whispers, and sidelong glances. No one cracked jokes about water guns anymore. But no one welcomed her either. Respect, if it was even that, came wrapped in caution, like the men were waiting for her to slip, desperate to believe her success had limits. That night, Marcus muttered to anyone who would listen, "Shooting paper doesn't mean a thing. Let's see what happens when it's not a calm range but combat. That's when real soldiers show what they're made of." Sarah heard him. She didn't respond. Words weren't her weapon, not yet. The next morning, Sergeant Murphy's voice carried across the field. "Advanced drills today. You think you impressed me yesterday? Good, forget it. The wind won't forgive you. Shadows won't forgive you. Your excuses won't save you. Let's see who adapts." Targets now stood at 100 yards. Wind flags flicked like restless hands. The sun cast sharp, shifting shadows. Every small mistake would show. Danny Rodriguez went first, jaw tight, movement stiff with determination. He compensated for the wind, or tried to. Shots landed but scattered. Better than yesterday but far from mastery. One by one the men tried. Kevin, Jake, Marcus, each struggled, some harder than others. Bullets tugged off course by the invisible push of the wind. Confidence evaporated, excuses followed. And then Sarah stepped forward. The whispers started again, but they weren't cruel now, they were cautious. A few curious, some anxious. Could she repeat what she'd done, or would this be the day the myth broke? Sarah let them fade. She studied the range the way her grandfather had taught her, not just the targets but the air itself. The grass bent one way. Dust rose another. She felt the wind on her cheek, measured its rhythm, and adjusted her aim. Her breathing slowed. Her world shrank again. Rifle, sights, stillness. The first shot snapped downrange, just left of center. A solid hit, one Sergeant Murphy marked with a slow nod. The second struck cleanly in the bullseye. Third matched it. By the fifth shot, the silence was absolute. When she lowered her rifle, the men weren't laughing anymore. They weren't even whispering. They were staring. Murphy broke the silence. His voice carried, hard but edged with something rare. "Martinez, in 15 years I've never seen this from a recruit. Not once. You've got something special. Have you thought about where you want it to take you?" The question lingered all day, all night. In the quiet of the barracks, while cleaning her rifle with careful precision, Sarah realized she was standing at the edge of something she hadn't expected. For weeks, she had only thought about survival, about proving she could endure. But now, she began to wonder if she was meant for more. The next evening, the rumor became fact. Colonel Patricia Harrison wanted to see her. Walking into the colonel's office was like stepping into another world. The walls carried 30 years of history, photographs with generals, commendations framed in glass, small tokens from deployments around the globe. For Sarah, it was intimidating but also grounding. Proof of what a woman could achieve here, despite the odds. "At ease, Martinez," Harrison said, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I've seen your scores, impressive, for someone without formal training." Sarah stood straighter, trying to control the tightness in her chest. "Thank you, ma'am. My grandfather, he taught me some things." Harrison studied her in silence, weighing her with a veteran's gaze. "Murphy tells me you're a natural. That matters. But raw talent only gets you so far. The question is, do you want to push further?" Sarah hesitated, unsure if she was allowed to say yes, unsure if she was ready for what that meant. Harrison didn't press. She simply opened a folder thick with training schedules. "We're arranging for you to join an advanced marksmanship group. Consider it an evaluation. You'll train with men who have already proven themselves. It won't be easy, but you've earned the chance." The decision wasn't hers anymore. The door had been opened. The next morning, Sarah found herself reporting to a different section of the base. 8 soldiers stood waiting, all men, all older. None of them smiled when she arrived. Their eyes said it all. Another test, another chance to prove or to fail. The group's leader, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen, stepped forward. Compact, sharp-eyed, his hands carried the calluses of real combat. He looked her over once, then said, "So, you're the recruit everyone's talking about. Let's see if the stories hold up." No laughter this time, just scrutiny. The exercise was unlike anything she had faced. No prone position, no calm targets, instead obstacles, barricades, awkward angles, moving between cover and firing points, time limits, stress. It wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about chaos. Chen demonstrated smooth and efficient, his shots ringing steel with steady rhythm. 7 out of 10 targets. Respectable. Then Michael Chang, quiet, calm, flawless, 9 out of 10. The bar had been set high. Sarah felt the weight as she stepped forward. She wasn't up against raw recruits anymore. These were experienced soldiers, men who had already survived the crucible she was still walking into. The course loomed in front of her, walls to shoot around, barriers to crawl under, targets that would punish hesitation. She breathed once, twice, let her body find its rhythm. She remembered her grandfather again. Not his lessons on the porch this time, but his barn, the tight spaces, the strange angles, the playful challenges he had set. Shoot from here, Sarah. Now here. Don't fight it. Find what works for you. The memory steadied her. She cleared the first wall, found her angle, fired, clean hit. Crawled under the barrier, twisted into position, fired again. Another hit. The rifle moved like part of her body, her smaller frame slipping where larger men had struggled. She moved fluidly, her shots coming steady, measured, deliberate. When the last target fell, the silence of judgment hung again. 8 of 10. Not luck, not beginner's fortune, proof. Chen's voice was clipped, professional. Not bad, movement was clean, adapted well, potential's there. But his eyes betrayed something else, something closer to respect. The other men didn't smile, but they didn't dismiss her either. Over the next days, the training intensified. Low-light shooting, moving targets, long distances. Each test pulled her further from the comfort of that first range, and each time she adapted. Sometimes she stumbled, sometimes she fought frustration, but always she learned. The breakthrough came at night. Under green glow of night vision, the world looked alien. Shapes blurred, distances lied, even experienced men faltered, shots missed, tempers rose. But Sarah found something different in the darkness, a strange quiet, the distractions stripped away, her breathing, her hands, her focus all sharper. The rifle barked softly and the targets fell, one after another. When the scores came in, she had outperformed half the group, men with years more training, men who had once sneered. That night Chen approached her privately. His voice carried no softness but no mockery either. "Martinez, I've been doing this for 8 years. I've seen a lot of soldiers. You're rough. You need polish. More weapon systems, more time, but your natural ability is rare." He paused, as if weighing the risk of his own words. "There's a selection coming in 3 months. Scout sniper school, most never make it. 70% fail. It's brutal academics, field work, physical, mental. And you'd be the only woman ever to attempt it. But if you're serious, I'd recommend you." The words froze her. Scout sniper school, the pinnacle, the place whispered about in barracks, feared and respected in equal measure. Sarah thought about the laughter, about the whispers, about how far she had come in just weeks. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. "What would I need to do to prepare, Sergeant?" she asked. Chen's mouth tightened, then almost curved into the smallest hint of approval. "Now that's the right question." The next 3 months would change everything. And Sarah knew it. How much weight can a body carry before the soul decides to quit? That was the question Sarah wrestled with at 4:30 every morning when the alarm ripped her out of sleep and Staff Sergeant Chen's voice demanded more from her than she thought she had. The advanced group had ended. Now it was just her. Alone in a program Chen had designed to push her toward the edge of collapse, because only there, he said, would she find out if she was built for the sniper path. Her days blurred into a punishing rhythm. Physical conditioning before dawn, heavy packs, endless miles, weights that felt engineered to break her small frame. Then 8 hours of marksmanship, drills that stripped away bad habits until each movement was pure muscle memory. Afternoons filled with academics, ballistics equations, meteorology charts, range estimation formulas so complex they made her head pound. And when others rested, Sarah stayed in the classroom, studying under dim fluorescent light until her eyes blurred and her hand ached from calculations. Her body protested every step. Her legs trembled under rucksacks that weighed nearly half her body. Her shoulders screamed. Her hands blistered. Once, midway through a timed run with a 50-pound load, she collapsed in the dirt, chest heaving, vision darkening. For a moment, she wanted to quit. For a moment, she wondered if Marcus had been right all along, if she wasn't built for this world. But then she heard her grandfather's voice. "Don't fight the weight, sweetheart. Learn it. Let it settle, make it part of you." So she stood up. She finished the run. Chen noticed. He said nothing, but his silence meant more than praise. The respect on base shifted slowly. At first, soldiers stared, amused at the sight of the smallest recruit dragging herself through drills that broke men twice her size. But when she never gave in, when she ran until her lungs burned, when she carried weight until her knees buckled but still rose, the laughter died. In its place came something different. Not quite admiration. Not yet, but recognition. And then there was Gunnery Sergeant Lisa Park. She arrived in the second month, a Marine with sharp eyes and a sharper history. One of the few women to ever attempt sniper training, sidelined not by failure but by injury. She was blunt, unflinching, and she understood better than anyone what Sarah was up against. "You think this is about being the best shot," Park said one evening, tossing a ballistics textbook onto Sarah's desk. "That's 20% of it, the rest. It's science, it's patience, it's discipline. And for you, it's proving every damn day that you're not here to make a statement. You're here to do the job." Sarah listened. She absorbed every word. Park became her mentor, not by coddling her but by sharpening her. When Sarah faltered with an equation, Park pushed her harder. When Sarah missed a calculation by an inch, Park reminded her an inch meant life or death at 800 yards. And late at night, when Sarah's hands cramped from scribbling formulas and her body begged for sleep, Park's words echoed like steel. "Think like an engineer. Act like a ghost." The physical training remained brutal. Scout snipers weren't just shooters, they were ghosts in the field. They carried gear through swamps, mountains, deserts. They waited motionless for hours in impossible positions, their bodies aching while their minds sharpened. Chen drilled this into Sarah. Long hours lying in the dirt, crawling inches at a time, carrying packs until her back screamed. Her size, once mocked, became both her curse and her secret weapon. She couldn't match the men in raw strength, so she built endurance. She learned to move where they couldn't, to slip through tight terrain, to adapt. While others struggled to drag their bulk under obstacles, Sarah flowed. Where bigger men made noise, she was silence. Still, the pain was constant. Her body was bruised, blistered, scarred. Some nights she curled on her bunk, teeth clenched against waves of exhaustion. But when morning came, she rose again, because to stop was to fail. Her breakthrough came in the 7th week. It was a 12-hour field exercise. She was required to establish a hidden position, observe a simulated target area, and engage enemies at ranges beyond anything she'd faced before. The test wasn't about shooting. It was about patience, camouflage, discipline. Sarah spent hours studying the terrain. She found a ridgeline with natural cover, then spent 2 more hours blending into it, pulling branches, breaking outlines, smearing dirt across her skin. By the time she settled in, she was no longer Sarah. She was part of the earth. The waiting was harder than the shooting. 12 hours of stillness, her muscles cramping, her body begging to shift. Insects crawled over her arms. Sweat trickled down her neck. But she did not move. She did not break. When the first target appeared, she was ready. Calculations done, breathing steady. One shot, one hit, and again, and again. Each shot precise, each movement invisible. When evaluators finally reached her position, they were stunned. Her camouflage was nearly perfect, her discipline unbroken, her shots flawless. Master Sergeant Williams, the evaluator, shook his head in disbelief. Outstanding work, Martinez. Patience and discipline. That's sniper material. For Sarah, it wasn't pride she felt. It was relief. Proof that she could hold. Proof that she belonged. Word spread again. Not exaggerated this time, but recorded, written into reports that reached Colonel Harrison's desk. And this time, the whispers on base weren't mocking, they were respectful. Soldiers who had once laughed now watched her with quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't the fragile girl anymore. She was the one who wouldn't break. By the final month, Sarah was no longer just training, she was transforming. She learned advanced camouflage, blending into environments so completely that men walked past her without noticing. She studied intelligence gathering, learning to sketch maps, record patterns, build the silent knowledge that made missions succeed. She practiced mission planning, running scenarios where she had to choose when to strike, when to wait, and when to walk away. Her instructors noticed. Captain James Morrison, a sniper veteran with 4 deployments, watched her during a complex drill. When she finished, his words were direct. "Martinez, I've seen men with 10 years experience struggle with what you just did. Natural ability is one thing, but you've got something rarer, discipline. That can't be taught." Still, the doubts weren't gone. Sarah felt them every night before sleep, gnawing at her chest. What if she failed at the real thing? What if the respect she was starting to earn evaporated the moment she stumbled? The fear was always there, but so was the fire. The night before reporting for Scout Sniper School, she made her first phone call home. She hadn't wanted her mother to hear the exhaustion in her voice during training, but now she needed the anchor. Her mother's voice cracked with pride. "Mihija, your grandfather would be proud. He always said you had a gift, but gifts don't matter unless you're willing to work. And you've worked." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the words steady her. Her grandfather's ghost was always there, in the porch lessons, in the barn games, in the steady rhythm of her breathing. And now, in the path ahead. The next morning at 400, Sarah stood in formation with 11 other candidates. Cold air bit at her skin. Her breath fogged the darkness. Every man around her was bigger, older, battle-tested. She was the smallest, the only woman, the one with everything to prove. Master Sergeant Rick Stone stepped out of the shadows, eyes like steel, voice like gravel. "For the next 8 weeks you belong to me. This program breaks 70%. Some fail in the classroom, some fail on the range, some fail in the field, and some realize they don't want it bad enough. But make no mistake, most of you will not graduate." His gaze swept across the formation, lingering on Sarah just long enough to remind her that he knew exactly who she was. Her heart pounded, her body trembled, but she didn't flinch. Because she knew this was the beginning of everything. And this time, there would be no laughter. What happens when the smallest voice enters a place built to silence weakness? Scout Sniper School didn't welcome Sarah with open arms. It didn't welcome anyone. It swallowed them whole and spat out only those who learned to live in its unforgiving rhythm. 12 candidates stood in formation that first gray morning. Their breath turned to mist in the cold November air. Sarah was the only woman, the smallest body by a margin that made her look almost fragile in comparison. Around her were infantry veterans, men hardened by deployments, men whose stories weighed more than her entire service. She knew what they were thinking. She could read it in the sidelong glances, the way some smirked, the way others avoided looking at her at all. The idea of her standing here, shoulder to shoulder with them, seemed like an insult to what this place represented. Master Sergeant Rick Stone stepped out of the building, his boots deliberate, his presence heavier than the dawn. His face carried years of hard teaching, his eyes the cold patience of a predator. "For the next 8 weeks," he said, his voice cutting like steel, "you belong to me. This program has a 70% failure rate. Some of you will wash out in the classroom, some on the range, some in the field. Some will decide you don't want it badly enough. But understand this, most of you will not graduate." His gaze moved along the line of candidates like a blade. When it reached Sarah, it paused, longer than the others. No expression, no judgment, just that lingering weight that told her she had already been marked. The first week hit like a hammer. Academics by day, fieldwork by night. Ballistics, meteorology, range estimation. Equations that stretched across the page, variables stacked on top of variables, each one meaning the difference between a clean shot and a complete miss. The classroom was a graveyard of confidence, grown men staring at problems that twisted their brains into knots. Sarah had studied for months. Park had drilled her on equations until she could work them in her sleep. Still, the pace here was relentless. Each day's work felt like drinking from a fire hose. Every error was circled in red, every mistake a strike against her chances. The physical side was worse. Heavy packs, endless rucks, obstacle courses under weight that bent her shoulders, bruised her hips, and tested her willpower. She had always known her size was a disadvantage, but here there were no allowances, no exceptions. The standard was the standard. By the end of the first week, blisters covered her feet, her back screamed every time she lifted a load, and her hands shook when she tried to solve formulas late at night. But she did not quit. Sergeant First Class David Kumar, one of the assistant instructors, noticed. During a stalking exercise, Sarah inched through thick grass while instructors hunted for her position. She moved slow, steady, controlled. When she reached her firing point and remained undetected, Kumar whispered to Stone later that night, "She's not showboating. No grandstanding. Just quiet execution. That's what we want." Stone said nothing, but the silence wasn't dismissal, it was acknowledgement. The first real test came in the second week. A comprehensive academic exam, 3 hours of equations, range estimations, and identification drills. Historically, 30% failed here. Sarah worked through the pages methodically, her pencil steady despite the ache in her hand. Each problem was a puzzle, each answer a careful calculation. She double-checked her math, triple-checked. When time was called, she felt like she had run a marathon without moving an inch. The results were posted the next morning. Sarah Martinez, highest score in the class. The men read the sheet in silence. Some stared, some muttered excuses, but no one laughed. Stone called her aside afterward. "Outstanding work," he said, voice low, sharp as ever. "But don't let it sink in too deep. The academics only get harder, and we haven't even started the real shooting." He wasn't wrong. The third week introduced long-range precision, targets at 600 yards, then 800, then further. At these ranges, the bullet was no longer simple steel and powder. It was a slave to air, to gravity, to weather, to mistakes invisible to the naked eye, a breath too heavy, a trigger squeezed too quick, a half-degree of wind ignored, and the shot was gone. Sarah's first attempt at 600 was humbling. She had calculated, prepared, steadied her breathing. But when she pulled the trigger, her shot missed the target completely. The silence afterward was deafening. She felt heat crawl up her neck, her heartbeat thunder in her ears. The men behind her shifted, their doubt returning like a tide. Staff Sergeant Chen, now part of the sniper cadre, leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Happens to everyone the first time. Distance magnifies everything. Don't break, learn." That night Sarah lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. She wanted to scream, wanted to cry, but she forced herself instead to replay every step of her shot, every calculation, every breath, every twitch. The next day she adjusted, read the wind with more care, slowed her breathing, corrected her trigger pull. The rifle cracked, and this time the round struck home, then another, then another. Her shots grouped tighter, cleaner. By the end of the drill, her confidence was scarred but alive. By the fourth week, 3 men were gone. 2 had failed the academics. 1 had broken on the range. The remaining 9 felt the pressure. Camaraderie thinned. Competition sharpened. Each man knew the odds, knew that only the best would survive. Sarah knew it too. The 5th week delivered the crucible. A live-fire drill designed to simulate combat stress, multiple targets at varying distances, shifting wind, strict time. Failure meant elimination. Sarah's heart pounded as she stepped to the line. But then silence, not around her but inside. The same quiet she had found as a girl on her grandfather's porch, the calm between breaths. She engaged the first target at 400 yards, adjusted for wind, fired, clean hit, moved to 600, adjusted again, fired, another hit. On and on, her rhythm unbroken, her shots flowing like water. When the drill ended, she had engaged every target successfully. Best overall score of the class. Stone studied her target sheet, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, exceptional shooting, Martinez, calm under pressure. That's what we want in the field. The words carried weight because Stone never praised lightly. The men around her knew it. For the first time, she wasn't just tolerated, she was respected. That night, Corporal James Wright, a battle-tested infantryman, approached her quietly. "When I saw you here, I thought this was a social experiment. I was wrong. You earned this." Sarah nodded, too tired to speak. But inside, something shifted. Respect from the men meant less than her own belief, yet it mattered all the same. The 6th week brought the hardest test yet, extended field exercises. 72 hours alone. Full combat load. Establish a concealed position. Gather intelligence. Engage targets, avoid detection. Sarah moved through the woods at dawn, her pack heavy, her body sore. Every twig threatened to betray her. Every shadow seemed to hold an instructor waiting to catch her mistake. She crawled for hours, her hands raw, her knees bruised. But she did not falter. She found her observation point, blended into the terrain until she vanished. For 18 hours she waited, documenting every vehicle, every movement, her body screaming in stillness, her mind sharpening with patience. On the 2nd day, a patrol passed within 20 feet. She didn't move. Not when sweat dripped into her eyes, not when an instructor's boot stopped directly in front of her. She became stone, invisible. When the target finally appeared, she was ready. 700 yards, 1 chance. Her calculations exact, her breathing slow. The rifle cracked, the target fell. She exfiltrated as planned, slipping through the terrain unseen. When the exercise ended, her score was nearly perfect. Stone met her eyes during the debrief. "One of the finest student performances I've seen. Planning, execution, discipline, exactly what we want." For Sarah, the words landed heavier than the rifle ever had. She had not just survived here, she had excelled. By the end of the week, only 7 candidates remained. The laughter of the past felt like another lifetime. The whispers were gone. Now when the men looked at her, they saw competition. And when Sarah looked back, she finally believed she belonged here. How long can a human body remain still before the mind begins to unravel? That was the question Sarah faced in the 6th week of Scout Sniper School. The early academic victories were behind her. The clean groupings, the praised drills, the grudging respect she had earned, all of it meant nothing now. What mattered here wasn't just hitting targets. It was disappearing, becoming a shadow, remaining unseen until the moment of decision, then striking with precision and vanishing again. The field exercises were designed to break even the strongest candidates, 72 hours at a time. Packs loaded with gear heavy enough to bruise bone, crawling through mud, through brush, through terrain designed to punish every mistake. Camouflage wasn't just a lesson anymore, it was survival. Sarah studied the earth like scripture, every blade of grass, every shadow. She crawled inch by inch, her elbows raw, her knees torn open, her face pressed into soil until she could taste it. Hours passed without progress more than a few feet, but that was the point, to move slow enough that even the most watchful eyes couldn't catch the shift. She reached her observation point just before dusk, a ridgeline overlooking the simulated compound. The air was cold, the ground unforgiving. She worked for 2 more hours, blending herself into it, branches, dirt, broken outlines. When she was done, she was Sarah anymore. She was a stone, a shadow, a piece of the terrain. And then waiting. 18 hours of silence. The world shrank to the slow tick of her pulse, the sting of insects crawling across her skin, the ache of muscles locked in place. Time blurred. Thoughts crept in, whispers of doubt, of failure, of how easy it would be to shift, to scratch, to move. But she didn't. When the first target appeared at dawn, her scope was already aligned. She adjusted for distance, for wind, for light. Her breathing slowed, her trigger squeezed. A single crack and the target fell. The rest of the day passed in fragments. A truck moved in. Men appeared, vanished. Each time she engaged, it was clean, precise, deliberate. On the second day, disaster nearly came. A patrol swept through the area, instructors playing the role of hunters. They moved with deliberate purpose, scanning every bush, every stone. Sarah lay frozen as boots crunched closer. 20 feet, 15, 10. One soldier stopped directly in front of her. His boot hovered inches from her face, his rifle angled down, his eyes scanning. Her heart hammered so loud she swore it would betray her. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. A fly crawled across her cheek, but she didn't move. For over an hour she remained stone, her body screaming, her mind battling panic. And then the patrol moved on. Only when the last bootstep faded did she let her lungs fill fully again. That evening the high-value target appeared at 700 yards. She recalculated, adjusted for shifting wind, waited for the precise moment. When it came, her shot was perfect, clean, immediate. Her extraction was deliberate, silent. She followed the route she had planned, moving only when shadows covered her, freezing when the world seemed too loud. Hours later, she reached the extraction point unseen. When the exercise ended, the evaluators were nearly stunned. Her camouflage had been flawless, her patience unbroken, her shots precise. "Martinez," Stone said during the debrief, his voice flat but carrying weight, "that was one of the finest student performances I've seen." The words hit harder than any bullet. By then only 7 candidates remained. 12 had begun. 5 were gone. Each man still standing knew the truth. One mistake could erase everything. The 7th week raised the bar again. This time the mission lasted 4 days. Each candidate received a scenario, each designed to stretch them to their absolute limit. Sarah's assignment: infiltrate a heavily defended area, conduct surveillance for 48 hours, and engage a high-value target at extreme range, then exfiltrate under pursuit. Her planning began in the classroom. Hours studying aerial photographs, drawing maps, marking potential routes. She calculated distances, noted weather forecasts, rehearsed scenarios in her head. When she finally shouldered her pack and stepped into the cold night, she carried not just her gear but the weight of her plan. The infiltration was brutal. 5 hours across broken ground, her body groaning under the pack, her knees buckling on inclines. Every step was a battle against fatigue. She moved through brush, slid across rocks, crawled under fences, each movement silent, each pause deliberate. By dawn, she had reached her position, a patch of terrain that offered both cover and clear sightlines. She built her hide with patient hands, weaving branches, breaking her outline, settling into the earth until she was invisible again. Then came the waiting. The first day passed slowly. Vehicles entered and left the compound below. Guards rotated. She noted everything, scribbling in her log without shifting her body. Hours dragged, the cold gnawed at her muscles, her eyes strained through the scope until they blurred. The second day nearly broke her. A patrol swept closer than expected, combing the area with a precision that tested her camouflage. At one point, a man paused within 15 feet, staring directly in her direction. Sarah lay motionless, breath shallow, heart thunderous. She felt a drop of sweat roll down her cheek but resisted the urge to brush it away. For 90 minutes she did not move. Finally, the patrol moved on. By the third day her body was wrecked, muscles locked, joints screaming, but her mind sharp, focused. The moment came in the afternoon when the high-value target appeared in the open. Her rangefinder gave the distance, 850 yards, longer than anything she had ever attempted under real conditions, a distance that punished the smallest error. She calculated wind, temperature, pressure, humidity, adjusted her scope, breathed in, breathed out. The crosshairs steadied. Her finger squeezed. The rifle cracked. Through the scope, she watched the target fall. Perfect. But there was no time to savor it. She had to move. Extraction was the most dangerous phase, the moment when the enemy would be hunting hardest. She slipped from her position, following the route she had rehearsed, moved when shadows covered her, froze when the world seemed too loud. Hours passed in slow rhythm, her pack heavy, her body screaming, her mind locked in survival. When she finally reached the extraction point, she was spent. Exhaustion pressed down on her like gravity, but she was unseen, uncaught, successful. The debrief was brief but telling. Martinez, Stone said, his tone harder than the words, that was professional-level work, field craft, patience. And that shot at 850, remarkable. You've proven you can perform at operational level. Sarah lowered her eyes, not out of shame but out of quiet gratitude. She didn't need to smile. She didn't need to boast. The work spoke for itself. The final 2 weeks loomed. The end of the program. But Sarah knew the truth, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the hardest chapter. She had entered this place as a target of laughter. She had endured as a question mark. And now she was recognized as something else entirely. A competitor. A threat. And perhaps, just perhaps, a sniper. What happens when exhaustion becomes the only companion and silence the only witness? The 7th week began with a warning. Stone assembled the remaining 7 candidates, his voice carrying across the cold air like gravel rolling down steel. You've made it further than most, but don't mistake survival for success. The final weeks are not about proving you can compete. They are about proving you can perform at the level required for operational deployment. Out there, he pointed to the horizon, mistakes aren't graded, they are buried. Sarah stood in formation, her breath fogging in the morning chill, her shoulders heavy beneath the pack straps that seemed permanently welded to her skin. 7 left, from 12, and each one carried scars of the journey, blisters turned to calluses, pride stripped to bone, egos burned away in the fire of failure. Her own scars weren't visible, but they were there. Nights of trembling exhaustion, mornings where her body resisted even rising from the bunk. The gnawing voice of doubt that never truly vanished, only quieted when the rifle steadied in her hands. The first test of the week was academic, a final exam covering every subject they had studied: ballistics, meteorology, camouflage theory, mission planning. 3 hours of relentless questioning, equations that demanded precision, scenarios that required judgment under pressure. Sarah worked methodically, her pencil scratching across the page in steady rhythm. Each problem was another enemy, another target. She fought through them with the same patience she brought to the field. When the results were posted, she scanned the sheet once and looked away before anyone could see her expression. Highest score again. Second time in the program. She didn't celebrate, she didn't gloat, But inside, a quiet truth settled deeper. She belonged here. Stone called her into his office later. His words were blunt. "Your academic preparation has been exemplary, but books don't take the shot. Don't let numbers make you arrogant. The hardest parts are still ahead." She nodded silent. She understood. The following week began with the long-range shooting exam. Ranges stretched to 1,000 yards. Targets so small through the scope they looked like shadows on the horizon. Every variable mattered: temperature, humidity, wind at 3 different points. Sarah prepared the way she always did. Slow, steady, careful. She lined up the first shot, her breathing calm despite the pressure of Stone's watchful gaze. The rifle cracked, the target rang. Again, again, each shot deliberate. By the end of the test, she had achieved a perfect score, every target within the required zone. The men glanced at her differently now, not with disbelief, not with annoyance, with something sharper: respect, competition, recognition that she wasn't just keeping up, she was setting the standard. But respect in a place like this didn't soften the edges, it sharpened them. Every candidate left knew that each spot was earned by pushing another out. That pressure carried into the most grueling test yet, the 4-day final mission. Each candidate was given a scenario, but Sarah's was the kind that instructors whispered about. Infiltrate a heavily defended area, conduct 2 days of surveillance, engage a high-value target at extended range, then exfiltrate under active pursuit. It was the kind of test designed not just to measure skill, but to break resolve. Her planning took 6 hours. She studied aerial photographs until the shapes blurred, marking potential routes, fallback options, alternate firing positions. She calculated distances, logged variables, rehearsed contingencies until her brain ached. Then she shouldered her pack and stepped into the cold midnight air. The infiltration was punishing. 5 miles of broken terrain, forests, ridges, open fields she had to crawl across in darkness. Her pack weighed nearly 40 pounds. Her body screamed with every step, every crawl, every slide. At times she felt her strength slipping away, her arms trembling, her knees bruised raw. But she kept moving, inch by inch. By dawn, she reached her observation point, a small rise overlooking the compound. She spent another 2 hours building her hide, weaving brush, breaking outlines, blending into the earth until even she forgot where her skin ended and the dirt began. Then came the waiting. The first day passed in monotony. Guards rotated, vehicles entered and left. She documented everything in precise detail, her notes steady despite the cramp in her hands. The cold sank into her bones, her body begged for movement, but she resisted. The second day brought the near discovery that would haunt her memory. A patrol swept directly toward her position. 2 men, instructors playing hunters. Their eyes scanned, their rifles ready. They stopped within 15 feet. One crouched, studying the ground. The other turned, his gaze sweeping across the very brush that concealed her. Sarah froze, her pulse hammered. A bead of sweat slipped down her temple, itching like fire. She wanted to move, to wipe it away, to breathe deep, but she did not. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then, without warning, they moved on. Only when their footsteps faded did she let air flood her lungs. By the 3rd day, fatigue gnawed at her mind. She fought to stay sharp, fought to keep her focus on the compound, on the patterns, on the notes that built the intelligence picture. She forced herself to recalculate distances, to recheck her firing solutions, to stay ready. And then the target appeared. She had waited 3 days for this. A high-value figure stepping into the open, moving into her predetermined zone. Her rangefinder confirmed it, 850 yards, the longest shot she had ever attempted in true conditions. Her mind raced through the math. Wind, steady left to right. Temperature cool, pressure stable. She adjusted, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. She breathed in, breathed out, let the world narrow to the crosshairs. The rifle cracked. Through her scope, she saw the target drop. Perfect. No celebration, no smile, just immediate action. She packed quickly, slid from her position, and began the exfiltration. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and silence, moving when shadows covered her, freezing when the world grew too loud. At one point, a patrol passed within 20 yards. She lay motionless, every nerve screaming, but she endured. 6 hours later, she reached the extraction point. When Stone read the reports, his expression betrayed nothing, but his words carried weight. Martinez, that was operational level work, planning, execution, patience, and that shot flawless. For Sarah, it wasn't pride she felt. It was something quieter, something stronger, a belief that had been fragile for months but now rooted deep. She was no longer surviving here. She was excelling. But the final week still waited, the last test, the last proof. And as the 7 candidates stood together that evening, the air between them felt charged. They had entered as strangers. Some had laughed at her. Some had doubted her. Now they all knew the truth. Sarah Martinez was no fluke, no experiment. She was competition. And soon, the program would decide who among them had earned the right to carry the title, Sniper. What does it take to walk into the fire, knowing most will not come out? The final 2 weeks of Scout Sniper School began with that unspoken question hanging over every candidate's head. 7 of them stood in formation, faces drawn tight with exhaustion, eyes hard with the knowledge that the end was near. They were no longer recruits. They were tempered steel, but steel could still shatter. Stone's voice was calm, even. This is where we separate those who can perform under perfect conditions from those who can perform when conditions fall apart. Real world, real pressure, real consequences. You've come too far to hide your weaknesses. Out there they will find you. No one spoke. No one moved. Each candidate understood every second from now on would be a trial. The first challenge was the advanced marksmanship exam. Targets stretched across distances most people couldn't even imagine attempting. 1,000 yards, 1,100, beyond. Sarah lay prone, cheek pressed against the stock, her world narrowed to glass and crosshairs. She adjusted for wind that shifted like a whisper across the field, for the barely perceptible drop in temperature, for the moisture that clung to the morning air. Each calculation stacked in her head, delicate and deliberate. Her finger squeezed, the rifle cracked. A second later, the distant target rang, again, again. Each shot a lesson in patience. Each round a conversation between her breath and the bullet. When the scores were posted, Sarah's name wasn't first, but it was near the top, enough to confirm what some already suspected: she wasn't just surviving here. She was holding her own against the very best. But the next phase was different. Harder, the stalks. The instructors called them the soul of sniper school. Candidates were dropped into terrain with one mission: infiltrate unseen, establish a firing position, and put a round on target while instructors scanned with high-powered optics, hunting for the slightest mistake. Detection meant failure. Too many failures meant expulsion. The first stalk nearly broke her. The ground was wet, thick with mud that clung to her uniform and seeped into her skin. She crawled inch by inch, every movement a battle of willpower. Her elbows burned, her knees shredded. At times, she moved no more than a foot in 10 minutes. Through her scope, she could see the target, but every time she settled in, the instructors' voices echoed over the radio: candidate detected. Not her, not yet, but others, men she respected, men who had once doubted her. Caught, exposed, eliminated. She kept moving, patient, patient, more patient than her body wanted her to be. When she finally reached firing position, she blended into the earth so completely she wasn't sure she still existed. The shot was clean, the target fell, and the radio stayed silent, no detection. When the instructors called the stalk complete, she exhaled for the first time in hours. That night exhaustion ate her alive, but she lay awake, knowing tomorrow would bring it all again. And it did. Day after day, stalk after stalk, each one harder than the last. The terrain changed: fields, woods, rocky hills, the distances lengthened. The instructor's optics grew sharper. Every movement was a gamble, every breath a risk. On the third stalk, disaster almost struck. She shifted her pack too quickly, the brush moving unnaturally. Stone's voice crackled over the radio. Possible detection, left flank. Her heart froze. She pressed into the dirt, body trembling, willing herself to vanish. Minutes crawled past. Finally, the radio cleared. No confirmation. Continue. She didn't move again for nearly an hour. By the end of the week, 3 more candidates were gone. From 7, they were down to 4, Sarah among them. The atmosphere shifted. The easy camaraderie of the early weeks had long since died. What remained now was quiet rivalry. Glances traded across the chow hall, each man weighing the others, calculating who might stumble next. Corporal Wright, steady, experienced, respected. Private First Class Alvarez, a natural shooter, cocky but undeniably skilled. Sergeant Tyler, older, scarred, with deployments that gave his words weight. And Sarah, the outlier, the surprise, the one none of them had expected to still be standing. The instructors saw it too. Stone gathered them after the day's stalk. You've proven you can crawl, you've proven you can shoot, now prove you can lead. The next test wasn't about rifles, it was about judgment. Each candidate was given a scenario, a simulated mission requiring infiltration, surveillance, engagement, and exfiltration. But this time they had to plan it entirely. Maps, weather charts, logistics, routes, every detail scrutinized. Sarah stared at the blank map for nearly an hour before drawing her first line. Her mind raced with possibilities, contingencies, risks. She thought of her grandfather, of his lessons about patience, about planning 3 steps ahead but never forgetting the ground beneath your feet. She built the plan slow, deliberate, every route with a backup, every variable accounted for. During the presentation, Stone asked her the question he asked all of them. What happens when the weather shifts unexpectedly, when the plan falls apart? Sarah looked him in the eye. Then I adapt. Plans are bones, execution is flesh. One without the other dies. Stone's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed, just enough to tell her he heard something real in her answer. The final week loomed. 4 candidates remained, each worn thin, each sharpened to a razor's edge, every one of them capable, but not every one of them destined. For Sarah, the pressure wasn't in proving she could keep up anymore. It was in proving she could finish. Her body was exhausted, her spirit stretched, but her resolve unbroken. And as the sun set on the last Sunday before graduation week, she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, whispering the question she had carried since the beginning. Not can I do this, but what will I become if I do? What does it mean to finish? Not just survive, not just endure, but to stand at the end of something designed to break most who dare it. The last week of Scout Sniper School carried that question like a shadow over every hour. 4 candidates remained, out of 12 who had begun. Each one scarred, each one sharpened, each one carrying the weight of 7 weeks of exhaustion, failure, discipline, and fleeting victories. Sarah stood among them at formation that Monday morning, her uniform damp from the dew, her body trembling with fatigue she no longer even tried to hide. They all trembled. Even Wright, the steady corporal. Even Alvarez, the cocky marksman. Even Tyler, the scarred veteran. They were equals now, stripped of ego, of rank, of pretense. All that remained was what they could prove in the dirt. Stone's voice cut through the chill. This is the last week. Final stalks, final evaluations. At the end, some of you will graduate, some of you will not. Don't think for a second you're safe just because you made it this far. This week has ended many who thought the same. He didn't need to say more. The message was clear. The program wasn't interested in effort, only results. The first stalk began at dawn. The terrain was a mix of open field and brush. The instructor's optics scanned every inch, hungry for mistakes. Sarah crawled for hours, her elbows sinking into mud, her knees torn open again. The sun burned her back, sweat blurred her vision, but she didn't stop. She moved as her grandfather had once taught her to breathe on the porch, slow, steady, invisible. When she reached her firing point, her body screamed for release, but she ignored it, built her hide, waited. The target appeared, her shot cracked, clean. No detection. The radio stayed silent. The second stalk was harder, rocky terrain, no cover but what you could invent. Sarah inched forward, using every shadow, every depression in the earth. Twice, she froze as the instructors swept optics across her position. Once she thought she was caught, Stone's voice crackled. Possible detection, Sector 5. Her heart hammered. She pressed herself into the dirt, refusing to move, refusing even to breathe fully. The silence stretched. Then, negative, continue. She exhaled, slow, careful, and finished the stalk undetected. By the third day, her body was breaking, her hands blistered, her uniform shredded, her muscles in revolt. At night, she lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, her mind whispering the question she had carried from the start: do I belong here? But each dawn she rose, because the only answer she had left was in the doing. The final test came on the fifth day, a stalk unlike the others. Instructors set the bar almost impossibly high: extended distance, open terrain, double target engagement. Failure rates on this test were legendary. Sarah's crawl took nearly 6 hours. The sun baked her. Ants crawled across her skin, biting, but she did not flinch. Her pack felt like lead, her body like stone. At one point, she nearly blacked out, the edges of her vision narrowing. She bit her tongue to stay awake, the iron taste of blood pulling her back. At last, she reached position. She blended into the earth, invisible. The first target appeared at 700 yards. She calculated, adjusted, fired. Hit. The second target appeared minutes later at 900. Her body shook with fatigue, her eyes blurred, but she forced herself to recalculate, forced herself to steady her breathing. The shot cracked. Through the scope, the second target dropped. Both down. And the radio stayed silent. No detection. When the instructors called end of exercise, Sarah didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She lay there, face pressed into the earth, letting exhaustion drain from her like water from a cracked canteen. Only later, back at the barracks, did she let herself believe she had done it. Graduation day came under a pale morning sky. The four of them stood in formation, uniforms crisp, boots polished, rifles gleaming. Their bodies still carried the marks of training, bruises, cuts, weight lost in sweat and hunger. But their eyes were different, harder, quieter, sharper. Stone stood before them, his presence as immovable as always. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied them, as if measuring not their performance but their souls. Finally his voice carried across the formation. You have endured what most cannot. You have proven patience, discipline, precision. You have shown that you can operate not just as shooters but as observers, planners, ghosts. Today you graduate Scout Sniper School. Today you earn the title. One by one he called their names: Wright, Alvarez, Tyler, and then Martinez. Sarah stepped forward, accepted the certificate, the insignia, the handshake. Stone's grip was firm, his eyes steady. You earned this, he said simply. For Sarah, those words carried more weight than any medal could. There was no applause, no cheers. Sniper School didn't end with celebration. It ended with silence, with the knowledge that what came next wasn't glory. It was the quiet, dangerous work for which they had been prepared. That night Sarah sat alone on the barracks steps, the cool air brushing her face. Around her the others laughed quietly, the relief of survival softening their edges. But she stayed silent, staring at the stars, thinking of the girl she had been months ago, mocked for picking up a rifle, doubted for even daring to stand here. She thought of her grandfather, of evenings on the porch, of whispered lessons about patience and discipline. She thought of every blister, every failure, every moment of doubt that had nearly broken her. And she thought of the silence now, not empty but full, full of proof. She didn't need to tell anyone who she was. She didn't need to argue or shout or demand recognition. She had finished. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.